And here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. I'm here with my man, Dr. Bill Campbell, and we're going to talk about fasting. How are you, Bill?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm excited about the new year. How's your publication going?
It's going very well. It's better than I thought it would do. I had conservative expectations, and I've well surpassed that. So yeah, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. So thank you for being a
I've known you
contributor.
for many years now, I think maybe 8, and I think I would describe you as conservative in your expectations for things.
I'm pretty much conservative in all walks of life.
Yeah. Politically speaking, I don't even know what conservative means anymore, because I think it used to mean liberal, and now I don't know. So we're not going to get into politics, but let's talk about this month. You had your experts review a very interesting study on time restricted feeding. So what I like to explain, first of all, the value of your publication, where you take a study that has some application in what we do as physique coaches, and then you have it reviewed by a couple coaching experts and their take on the study and how they would implement it or what their takeaways from. So let's talk a little bit about this month's issue.
Yeah, so it's called Body by Science, and I would say it's for a lot of people, but if I had to identify the perfect person, it is the physique coach. It's the person who
This guy.
Yeah, you and your massive team of coaches. It's exactly that. It's about fat loss. It's about building muscle.
Would you be okay with me distributing it to all my coaches?
Yeah, and then I think what we could do is I could hop on a call with them and talk about it, because
yeah,
I can't
well,
cover
because we are doing
everything.
some continuing education in the future, so that would be you would be a perfect person to help me design some continuing education stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny, I ran into Steven one day, just out in Wesley Chapel, and we kind of brainstormed about that. So
yeah, it's I always tell people it's hard to add a new car to the train when the train's already on the tracks running, right? And that's what our business is. It's you can't just stop it and go change something. You gotta change things while it's in motion, which obviously more challenging. So but I think time restricted feeding, just like anything else that is kind of catchy, it gets the notion that it's somehow better than just good old fashioned eat less, move more. So let's talk about the study that you reviewed and the results, and then we can get into like why it may be or may not be better.
all right, so the first thing I want to say about the study was it was 12 months long, so 1 year. That's incredible. Most dieting studies are 8 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes as little as 4 weeks. Any study that goes out for 12 months, you are going to learn in that study whether or not subjects can adhere to the diet, because it's the problem with short-term studies, and I'm guilty of this. A lot of my fat loss studies are 8 weeks or 10 weeks. Anybody can follow a diet for a short period of time, but when it starts getting into 6, 7, 8, 9 months, good luck.
Well, and this is honestly where I think a lot of the diet culture problems exist, because there's programs out there that they go, okay, for 75 days you're going to do this diet, and for 90 days or 30 days you're going to do this, and people will make incredible changes over that amount of time, but they may not learn the skills to maintain that weight loss, and so they have almost like a switch, like they're either on or off. So this is, I guess, over a course of a year you're going to find out if you can maintain something, right?
Yep, exactly. So I love this type of study design. What they did was they compared a time restricted feeding diet. So they had these subjects reduce their calories, but also restrict their feeding times. And they compared that to another group who also reduced their calories by the same amount, but there were no restrictions on when they could eat their food. So this is the perfect study to answer the question, is time restricted feeding better than any other diet, essentially, when you control for the caloric deficit, control for the macronutrients? And that's I mean, a lot of people will say, see, look, time, and again, I'm not anti-time restricted feeding. I think there may be a place for them. We can talk about it later. But a lot of people will conflate time restricted feeding research and say, look, they lost weight. And then most reasonable people would say, yes, they lost weight because they reduced their calories. There wasn't anything special about time restricted feeding other than the fact that they reduced their calories. So now this study really highlights, if there is something special about time restricted feeding relative to body composition, then this study would show that the subjects in time restricted feeding would lose more body fat or maintain more muscle mass than the other group.
Sure.
So let me just set the stage for what they did. Again, it was a 12-month study. Both groups reduced their caloric intake by about 25%, which I think is that's a very good moderate caloric deficit. It's not too severe. It's not so low that you're not going to see changes relatively soon. So they both reduced their calories by the same amount. The time restricted feeding group had an 8-hour window. They were allowed to eat anytime from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. No food before 8 a.m., no food after 4 p.m. By the way, that's kind of an odd eating window for our country, but this was in overweight Chinese people. And according to the authors of that study, that fit closer to how that culture typically eats in a day.
Interesting.
Whereas we have big dinners, they have a big lunch. So again, I didn't appreciate cultural differences, but that explains, according to the authors, why it was an 8 to 4. And then the other group, no restrictions. And then one other thing I want to highlight about the study design before we get into the results was just how intensive the subject adherence was, what they had to do, and how much support they got. So for the first 6 months of the study, all the subjects had to take pictures of their food, log their food, and they sent that in every day to the research staff. So that's that's a big task to do for 6 months. They also had, for the first 6 months, they also had bi-weekly calls with a health coach. And they had, I think it was 1 meeting, maybe 2 meetings per month where they would attend just to help them stay on their diets.
I mean, this sounds like working with a professional nutritionist, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why this study, I think, was successful in keeping so many subjects in the study for a year, because they had so much support. The last 6 months of the study, they did the same things, but it was reduced in half. So they had to do 3 days per week of logging their food every day for 3 days and taking a picture. They, instead of having a health coach meeting every other week, it was once a month. So the support dropped off. So now the logical question is, well, did they lose fat? Did one group lose more than the other? And the answer was no. Both diets caused a significant amount of body weight loss, no surprise. Both caused a significant amount of fat loss, no surprise. And both lost lean mass, not a lot, but there was no exercise component, so there was no surprise there. So essentially what this kind of confirms what pretty much everybody in evidence-based fitness and exercise and nutrition would suggest. You wouldn't expect a difference if there's no difference in a caloric deficit.
Right.
And that's what this study confirmed. So there was nothing special about time-restricted feeding relative to fat loss. Now, maybe there's some other benefits, digestion issues, maybe hunger feelings, etc. I can't speak to that. The study didn't mention that. But body composition, no differences. Both were equally as effective in a caloric deficit.
So immediately my thought is, they started out at a 25% caloric deficit. Was that ever adjusted, or did they just stay on the same calories the whole time?
No. So the way that I read the study was it stayed the same for the entire year. Now, in the research review, I actually put up a table where there was 6 months of weight loss, and then the final 6 months. And basically what you see is that in the first 6 months, they lost pretty much all of the body weight. That was the most. They actually gained a little bit back in the last 6 months, that little bit of body fat. They gained a little bit of body weight back, and that tells me they were still dieting, but probably not as much as what they were in the first 6 months. But no, there was no adjustments, which
Okay.
this is dieting culture, right? This is how most people go about their diets. They have no clue about diet breaks or refeeds or adjusting. It's
Sure.
just, here's your meals, and it's almost like a commercial dieting approach where there's no individualization.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the benefits that are touted about fasting are benefits to hormones, things like growth hormone and testosterone. And I mean, did this study look at any of that stuff? Did they do any blood work?
No, but I can comment on the growth hormone. Fasting does cause greater increases in growth hormone, but the reason that happens is because of a detriment to the anabolic actions in the body. What's happening is you are secreting or producing less IGF-1. We produce that growth hormone causes IGF-1. It's called insulin-like growth factor, very anabolic hormone. And when that's suppressed, that normally would act as a feedback loop. And basically, IGF-1 levels should go up as growth hormone levels go up. And then IGF-1 increases something called somatostatin, which tells the brain, stop making so much growth hormone. But when you're fasting, you're suppressing these IGF-1 levels. So the brain never gets the signal to reduce the production of growth hormone. So yes, growth hormone, it seems great, but it's not anabolic. It's catabolic in that sense. And that may be good for fat loss, but it's not good for maintaining muscle mass in that type of environment.
Well, yeah, losing lean body mass over the life of a diet is going to be detrimental to long-term health and keeping that body fat off. I think, you and I and all the people that are interested in body composition, I did attempt to do the 16-8 fast, and it sounds like that was an 8-hour window, right?
Yep. That's the
but
typical.
I think I did my window from noon to 8 p.m. Just because I find it easier to skip breakfast than I find it easier to skip dinner, especially with family life, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I found I couldn't comfortably stay within my numbers in an 8-hour window. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of muscle protein synthesis when it comes to like protein feedings and distributions. So, I mean, the way I'm looking at this is if you have an 8-hour window, I'm guessing the most you can get successful is 3 feedings of protein, or is it just 2? I mean, would you be able to get, with the refractory window being 4 to 6 hours, it almost maybe just 2 large feedings of protein?
I would think if you're getting a protein feeding right at the start of the window, opening up in the middle, and then you get another feeding at the end. So you're getting, let's say, at time 0, hour 4, and then again at hour 8. I think you could comfortably get 3 protein feedings in.
Okay.
But there's still a 16-hour period where you're having no protein intake. So you're still right in a suppressed muscle protein synthetic environment for that period of time.
And you mentioned another study where they actually gave larger protein feeding later in the day and a smaller one in the morning. And there they did notice a difference in body composition, right?
Yeah, and that was in male bodybuilders. I think it was an Italian study. That was another study that I covered a few months ago. And that might have been the study that you commented on.
Might have been.
I can't
been
remember
almost
back.
2 years since we did that.
Yeah, I only launched it last year. Yeah, but you did yours. But yeah, what they found there was they had a protein, let's just call it, they skewed protein. So one group of these bodybuilders had very little protein for breakfast, moderate amount for lunch, and then a lot of protein for dinner. And the other group reversed it. No, the other group basically said moderate amount for breakfast, moderate for lunch, moderate for dinner. So when protein was approximately distributed across the day, those male bodybuilders gained significantly more muscle mass over an 8-week period than the subjects that only had less than 10 grams for breakfast. So there's the evidence that we rely on, as well as 2 to 3 cellular studies. We have data just in cell studies that would suggest the same thing. But now we have one in humans that says you're not doing yourself any benefits if you're trying to, if muscle mass is important to you, you don't want to go long periods of time without optimal protein intakes on a per meal basis. So that's where this study, this time restricted feeding, that needs to be a known limitation. You have to know the positives and the drawbacks. And that's the primary drawback for a bodybuilder, for people who live a fit lifestyle. You are knowingly, if whatever benefit you're going to suggest that a fat time restricted feeding diet would help, and I can give an argument that it would help in certain cases, but you are sacrificing, or you are knowingly limiting your capacity to build or maintain muscle mass.
So a question would be, I don't know if they ever did a follow-up, but did any of the people that were on either side of this study decide to continue or discontinue its use, you know, as something that they want to do for the rest of their lives? I think because sustainability with a diet is a big reason why we preach what we preach with our company.
Yeah. No, there was no follow-up. Let me just see when this was published. So this was published in 2022. It's possible that if they decided to do that just hasn't been published yet. Now, let me mention an area that I see some utility for this type of approach. In another study, this was a flexible dieting study versus a time-restricted feeding study. So again, the flexible dieting group actually was told to reduce their calories. The time-restricted feeding group, this was a noon to 8, so a typical Western culture time-restricted feeding approach. They were not told to reduce their calories. They were told just the only thing you have to do is focus on when you can eat. So you can't eat before noon, you can't eat after 8 p.m. But there was no instructions to them to reduce their calories. And what happened after this study was the flexible dieting group, who was told to reduce their calories, they lost a significant amount of body fat. And the time-restricted feeding group also lost a significant amount of body fat. They actually matched the flexible dieting group. So this is where I think there's some value. They actually did reduce their calories, but I'd like to think, and again, I wasn't in their heads, but in their minds, they weren't dieting. They were just not eating in the morning and not eating later in the evening. So there's where I think there's some utility here. If your primary goal is fat loss and you're not hungry in the morning, and you can adhere to this, it's better for you for whatever reason, I think that's a good approach for those types of people. Again, now we have to make sure that we read the fine print. You are knowingly sacrificing some lean body mass, some muscle mass, if you do that approach. But if your primary goal is fat loss, I can live with that. To me, it's all about your priority at the time. Now, I don't want you to lose muscle, but if you are willing to sacrifice that for a greater fat loss on a diet that you can stick to, there's where there's utility for this, in my opinion.
Yeah. And the reason that I have kind of changed my opinion on, you know, I'll call them like aggressive dieting strategies, fasting, water fasting, any type of that, is that fat loss and dieting for a lot of people is psychological, right? And so for myself and for you and a lot of us that are not, I don't know, having any issues restricting calories or tracking diet, I think the problem that fasting solves for some people is the psychology of dieting. They have associated their day with eating certain types of foods. They don't deal well with hunger, whatever it might be, where you go, okay, now you give them some rules and they know they just have to adhere to those rules. It changes, and they have to, and then they start to suddenly realize, oh, it's okay if I'm hungry. Every time I'm hungry, I don't have to reach for something. You start to get into patterns. And even I notice it when I start dieting, and I'm currently in a dieting phase down for competition. I start noticing that the habits that I pick up when I'm walking through a store, I'll grab something as a snack and eat it. If my kids don't finish all their food, I'll be the Hoover. I'll finish it, right? So I start picking up these habits of just like eating other people's stuff or eating snacks. And I can see how that would easily translate over 20, 30 years into 30, 40, 50 pounds of body fat that then needs to be removed. And you have to unlearn that behavior. And so fasting or time restricted feeding these rules can then kind of force your brain to change its patterns. Stop grabbing a snack every time you walk through Target. You don't need 1,000-calorie Starbucks every time you go to the mall. Like these things just become like everyday routine. And no matter what the rules, whether it be flexible dieting, whether it be tracking, whether it be fasting, whether it be the clean eating diet, whatever approach, there is a set of rules in there that for some people, it's going to be successful. And other people are going to think it's ridiculous. Some people look at, keto and think that's ridiculous. And other people look at it and think it's the greatest thing that this planet has ever seen. So, and I see the case for both sides. And it's got to be through a case-by-case basis for what is the goal of this person, what is their history. I would not treat an obese person the same as I would treat a bodybuilding competitor that's 12 weeks out, right? It's just you can't have the same expectations. So I don't know if it's just, being 47 and experiencing a lot of life that you can kind of go, oh, I understand. But I almost feel like there's this tribalism amongst dieting where people go, no, this is the diet. I'm doing the carnivore. If you're an idiot, if you don't do carnivore. And I'm like, well, I do the carnivore diet. I eat a steak. But I'm an omnivore. I'm an omnivore diet. I eat it all.
I think what you said, people latch on to what works for them, and then they naively assume, well, this will work for everybody. And I think that's where being a professional coach, researcher, you appreciate that you may have found the perfect diet for you. That's awesome. But somebody else may have found a ketogenic diet or what I like is protein anchored flexible dieting for myself. So that's the art, I think, of helping people. Ultimately, adherence is the goal, and adherence can have a lot of different forms for a different people. So I think it's a matter of when I say flexible dieting, you can almost broaden flexible dieting and say flexible diets. Like, what is the approach? Is it ketogenic for one person? Might be very high carb for another. Could be zone diet. It could be Mediterranean diet, carnivore, time restricted feeding. To me, it's an experiment of what works for your adherence. And that's when, then you found it. What was your, when you said you did a time restricted feeding for a period of time. What was your motivation? Was it just to live that lifestyle, to improve as a coach, to see?
Yeah, I definitely just wanted to try it out and see, what were some of the benefits. Cause I'm someone who's not typically very hungry in the morning, unless I get up and I'm active. So I thought, okay, I could probably do fine with just a coffee, and maybe that broke the rules, but I would just have a coffee until noon. Some people are very specific about what you can have, because I assume there's probably 3 calories in coffee, whatever. But so I would have my coffee and just go about my work. And I'll say this, I very much looked forward to my eating, and I very much thought my digestion improved. But what I realized was I was never actually giving my digestive system a break, because I came from the era of you wake up and eat, and right before you go to bed, you eat. And in between you eat, right? That's how you build muscle, right? And so I think it taught me that, okay, it might be better for me to have a window of time where I don't eat. And I'll often not eat for 12 hours because I go to bed at 9 o'clock. I get up at 5 or 6 and do my cardio, have my coffee, and then eat when I'm hungry. I don't immediately eat. So sometimes there is a 10 to 12 hour window. And I have found my digestion has improved greatly since I've kind of adopted this approach where I'm not just constantly stuffing my face in the idea of being anabolic. I find that my digestion has improved. So I did maybe benefit from trying it out. I also found looking forward to a meal is exciting, because I think a lot of times what we do is we eat so often and so frequently the same thing that you start to just disassociate enjoying your meals. Whereas when you're really hungry, food tastes better. And so, I would really plan ahead in my head what I wanted to eat at 12 o'clock every day. So there was some benefits for sure. But the overarching theme is always, okay, but I'm missing out on anabolism at 7 a.m., that's a whole feeding that I'm missing out on. And I walk around at 220 to 230 pounds. Let's say I even go to the low end of protein around 200 grams a day. That's hard to fit in 3 meals in 8 hours.
Oh
That's
yeah.
60 to 80 grams of protein per meal, along with carbs and fats. So I'm telling you, when I say I couldn't get all the food in, I was uncomfortable eating that last meal because I hadn't really gotten those first 2 meals done. So yeah, that was
Yeah.
the issue for me.
That's a lot like you. I naturally kind of do a hybrid time restricted feeding approach, in the sense that I'm not hungry in the mornings. And I don't, we probably had some of the same early internet day education where you have to eat breakfast. And I actually tried to find research, importance of breakfast. I couldn't find any. And what I learned was I'm purposefully eating breakfast first thing in the morning when I get up, and my natural hunger was later in the day, and it is now. So what I've learned over time was I don't eat till about 10 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, am I sacrificing some anabolic activity? Potentially, but I would rather not gain body fat, or I'd rather not be hungry. It's more important for me to control my hunger and have a standard level of body fat than maybe than do my Ronnie Coleman impression. So I've just learned a time restricted approach works great for me, but it's not really time restricted. I'm just not eating the first time when I get up. I'm waiting a few hours. And something else I've learned is if I have carbs in the morning when I wake up, my ability to concentrate is not nearly as good as when I fast for the first few hours. So whether I don't like to call it time restricted feeding, because then people think, oh, I'm an advocate of time. No, I'm an advocate of finding an eating schedule that works for you, so that it, especially for people who struggle with hunger, because I'm a hunger whore. Like I'm constantly hungry. So I've learned things to help me manage that.
Yeah, I think that's more eating on your own circadian rhythm or whatever they want to call that. Like you eat in the pattern that, you feel hungry in, honoring those signals. So I, like you, am not very hungry in the morning. So I'll intentionally make that a very small meal. And it's usually just a protein shake and a banana. And then I feel like I have a ton of fats, carbs, and proteins left for the rest of the day. And so I can have a huge fourth meal. I usually do 4 meals. And that for me has been very successful. Now, if I know I'm going to go out and have a dinner, like a date night, I'll intentionally make my first 2 meals of the day basically just protein and a light carbohydrate source. You talked a little bit about some research years ago. You did something called the most anabolic meal, right? And it was a breakdown of macronutrients. I'm hoping you remember this and you're not going to laugh at me, but you broke down the ideal amount of protein, carbs, and fat in a single meal to be the most beneficial. And I remember it being somewhere like something like 8 grams of fat in that meal. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
I don't recall. I don't remember doing that, but I should remember that. Was it at a conference? Was it at a
Yeah, it was
seminar
at
that
one
we
of
met?
Lane's seminars. Now, to be fair, you're speaking to someone that has a photographic memory. So if I seen it on a screen, it's locked in my head. And it constantly pops in my head when I'm eating. Like, oh, there's only 3 grams of fat in this. I better eat some cashews, right? Like, so I'm constantly kind of
Oh,
like making sure I'm hitting almost like a leucine threshold, like a fat threshold for the meal to make that
yeah.
meal. Because fat does aid in digestion, like just little things like that. I think you could call it an eating disorder, but once you start learning about nutrition, I mean, I have my Arnold Schwarzenegger Modern Bodybuilding Encyclopedia back there, the first book I ever bought. And I think that's when it started. That's when I started thinking, like, I used to just eat when I was hungry, and I used to just eat what I wanted. And then you start going, oh, but I need to get protein in this meal if I want to build muscle. Right. So you start having these like formations of like, oh, and for me it was good because I was playing sports, and so I started focusing more on protein. Did this study, you talked about like the group that was fasting and the group that was macronutrient based, were they given guidance on macro breakdown for the day?
Yeah, it was pretty standard. Let me look here real quick. I know the protein, I think, was between 15 to 20%. probably 50 to 60% carbs. Let me just see.
I was gonna say, so is it it was a Chinese study, so the Chinese population, they're very carb heavy, maybe in their diet.
Yeah, and they definitely accounted for, there was no differences in the in the macronutrient composition of the meals. So again, yeah, 40 to 55% from carbs, 15 to 20% from protein, 20 to 30% from fat. So ranges, which is good because most normal people, I'll call them normal. Most normal people aren't going to hit an exact gram or percentage. So
Right.
very carb heavy, let's say 50% carbs, 20% protein, 30% fat as a roundabout average.
Do they have an actual number for the average like fat loss? Because you said they lost fat the first 6 months.
Yeah, so it was I'll look here in a second, but around 4% over the first 6 months. So the time restricted feeding group lost 4.7% of their body fat in the first 6 months, compared to the other group, which lost 4.4% of their body fat over 6 months. And then for the last 6 months, they both actually, the one group gained back about 1.5%. The daily caloric restriction group and the time restricted feeding group gained back about 0.5% of their body fat. So that you could make an argument, even though there was no statistically significant differences, the time restricted feeding group was better able to maintain their body fat losses in the last 6 months of the study.
Yeah, I mean, but they did have a more defined set of rules. So I mean, that makes sense. And I don't know, Chinese culture, how like diligent they are, but I would suspect that they're pretty dedicated to something when they're given a task,
Yeah. And like I said, they had all of the support too to kind of really help
Yeah,
them.
that's really huge because they could ask them questions, understand what was in certain food products. Because I think a lot of the confusion when it comes to nutrition that we struggle with is something says low fat or healthy on it, and people go, "Oh, that's healthy, it's low fat," and they don't actually understand that that's just a certain percent less fat than the normal product that company makes, right? So they get to call it low fat because it's, but so,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of confusion even in the press. You'll see one day, low fat diet is best, low carb diet is best. Like there's a lot of research on that is kind of misconstrued in the press. They'll take like a snippet out of a study and use that as the headline. Like, a glass of wine a day is great for fat loss, but they don't actually read the article or what the study was about. So they just say, "Oh, I can eat chocolate and I can have wine and lose weight."
Yeah. But you can if that's all you do.
For sure, for sure. Yeah.
And one other thing here, you mentioned earlier just about kind of eating around your circadian rhythms of hunger. So I have my students in my class, depending on the class, I have them at least attempt to not eat for over 30 hours. So they can eat going into bed, let's say on a Monday night. They don't eat anything on Tuesday, and they're not allowed to eat again until they wake up Wednesday morning. And I ask them, plan for this, talk about how you're feeling throughout the process. So I make them journal what they're doing throughout this. And of course, I have all of the legal protection so I don't get sued in case somebody passes out. Basically saying if you can't do it, that's fine. And it's kind of surprising how many students will journal. I went and poured my bowl of cereal, or I went and got my bagel and started eating it and then realized, oh, I'm not supposed to. Like, it's just like when you drive home from work, you don't remember actually how you got home.
Right.
It's this, to me, it was the same phenomenon with people and eating, either, when they get to work or like I just said, and maybe pouring themselves a bowl of cereal in the morning. A lot of this stuff is just so habit, and it has nothing to do with any hunger drive or any desire to eat. It's just habit. So that's a pretty powerful learning moment that I learned through doing that assignment with my students.
Yeah, and I think that's the real value. When I see people touting the benefits of fasting, and even now there's people doing 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour fasts. and touting the benefits of it. And the only one that really I'm comfortable agreeing with is that it just changes your pattern of behavior. I don't know if you follow Penn and Teller, but Penn was quite overweight. You know, he's a big guy. I had the
Yeah.
benefit of meeting him in person, and I think he was like 6'8", well over 300 pounds. I mean, a large man. And he was asking about dieting, and he did something that at the time sounded so ridiculous. You know, he's a very well-spoken, super intelligent, well thought out, articulate human being. Like, being around him, you're just like, wow, this guy like thinks about everything as far as you can take it. And he did a potato diet. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of the potato diet, but I didn't know that he did it.
Yeah. So, and he lost over 100 pounds using this diet. It's basically, you can eat as many potatoes as you want, but nothing else.
Are you allowed to put butter on them?
No.
Oh,
No, exactly. So you realize, like, when people talk about food, it's not so much the food that they crave, it's the fat and the salt and the, you know, that is what you crave. When you can eat as much of anything as you want, but it's not like calorically dense, like triggers that. So yeah, and also it just, he said it changed his food sensitivity. He started enjoying other foods again more. But I think, yeah, that you nailed it. The idea that we just go through our motions because it's what we do. And like, you know, one thing that every time I go through a dieting phase where I start focusing on fat loss again, I have to remind myself that when I go to a restaurant with friends, it's okay not to get a 32-ounce steak, right? Like, I start getting in the habit of, if I go out to eat because that's a treat, I'm going to treat myself. And I have to remind myself that I don't have to do that. I can make the option. You know, have you seen the teacher? I mean, it's old news now. It's maybe 8 or 10 years old. The teacher that he was teaching his students nutrition, and he made them go to McDonald's every day and pick foods out to fit his calories. And he lost like 60 pounds eating only McDonald's 3 times a day for a few months. And it,
yeah.
you know, it terrorized people. People are like, this is terrible. You're teaching people that McDonald's is bad. And he's like, no, what I'm teaching people is that you can go to McDonald's and get water and oatmeal. You don't have
Yeah.
to get a triple Big Mac, a large fry, and a shake, right? I think that's what we associate McDonald's with, but you can get a salad with grilled chicken. You can get oatmeal and a diet soda. You can get things that fit your calories, but that's the thing that, you know, every time I go through a little dieting phase, you know, somebody will want to go out to dinner and I'm like, oh, I can't go there. I'm like, why? All I have to say is, I'll just, you know, we went out to lunch the other day. I just got chicken and rice. Nobody cares, right? But it's this thing in my
No,
head where I want to go get the most delicious thing on the menu because I'm treating myself. So,
but they do care if you don't go for what they would perceive as a narcissistic rationale. Oh, he can't eat. And then I think there's also some feelings of guilt, right? Like, oh, well, does he think that
all
I'm
right.
good?
Yeah. My wife has lost our child. So I think I'm going to have to end the podcast here. She's asking me
Hey,
to go.
that's a good reason. All right, man.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. We'll get this out. Where can people find your publication? I want to make sure we get it out there.
Oh, go to my website, billcampbellphd.com. It's only $6.99, and that price will go up in a few months.
And you get all the back issues too, right? When you sign up.
You get the current month's issue and you get the previous month's issue, but not
Okay.
back to the beginning. I'm selling those as bundles.
Oh, perfect. Well, so there's another option there. So, well, I appreciate it, Bill. You have a good rest of your day, and hopefully we get to catch up in person soon. We keep doing these on Zoom and you down the street.
Yeah, let's do them. Let's do them in person. All right.
All right. Talk to you soon.
See ya.